Samantha, did you do the same thing? Did you have a character that you based your males on?
Not really, and I get asked that a lot. You know, my husband makes me swear that nothing is based on him. And, and I'm like, I swear you're not in a book anywhere.
Yeah.
But I get a lot from people who know me, and after they read my books, they're like, is that Frank anywhere? Because that's my husband's name. And I'm like, no. And I see them looking at him a little bit differently. Like, you know, is he really that sensitive, or is he really that? And it's like, no, really, he's not. I really, you know, growing up, I was always better friends with guys than with girls. I was always just hanging out as one of the guys, and so I feel like I had a little bit more of a perspective on how they think and act sometimes. And I'm an avid reader, so I mean I've been reading romance since I was 13, so it's sort of like you learn a little bit like what's popular, like what kind of male characters are popular.
Right.
So I
exactly.
tend to go on that.
And when you finally grow up, what do you want to be?
This is
I mean, since 13 years old, you read romance novels.
Yes.
Is that surprising? That's amazing. You know, and here you are.
I really, you know what, I always wanted to write. I just didn't think that I was ever going to be able to do it. And trying to go the traditional route was just frustrating. And so that's why I decided to go the indie route, because I can now write what I want to write in my own time frame, you know.
Yeah, I love that. And you were actually an educator before this. Did you teach writing or English? Or?
I taught creative writing. I homeschooled my older son for 10 years. And the homeschool community here is quite large, and we had a lot of co-op classes and that sort of thing. And I taught creative writing and research paper and that sort of thing from elementary all the way up to high school.
Wow.
And it was a great experience. And when I got to the high school level, I was encouraging these kids that they could self-publish. And I'm thinking, if I'm telling them to do it, why aren't I doing it?
Right.
So
There you go.
it's been cool watching their feedback to my success too.
Now, coming back to the characters, do you think that you have a hard time? I would think with romance specifically, it would be very difficult to walk that boundary, because men stereotypically don't like to talk about love, you know, don't want to share their emotions. Do you have a hard time balancing that with your male characters? And if so, how do you deal with that?
I think for me, I find that a lot of the male characters that I write, that they don't talk about it. They're like fighting it the whole way. There's only been like 1 or 2 books where I've had the male lead be somebody who's like, oh my gosh, I love you, and I want to talk about how much I love you, and you know, love, love, love. But for the most part, they fight it throughout. You know, like they don't want to talk about it with anybody. You know, they don't want to deal with the relationship as an emotional thing. It's more they want to deal with it more as it's a physical thing. That's something that they don't need, and that's sort of a formula that works.
Okay.
You know.
Makes sense. Now,
So
go
the
ahead.
9 books that I see that you have written so far,
Uh-huh.
they're all individual books. They're not series of any kind.
No, well, it's sort of a mix. Like most of them are standalone, but I just finished a trilogy. The Montgomery Brothers, that was a trilogy, and but most of them are standalones. You know, and I'm kind of learning that this whole thing with series is a very big thing right now. Everybody's writing series,
Right.
and I could see the appeal to it. But I kind of like having standalone books as well.
Okay.
You know, sometimes you have an idea and it just doesn't fit into a series.
Since we pick one book, in this case, let's pick the series.
Okay.
This particular one about the Montgomery Brothers, you know,
Mm-hmm.
want to give us a little bit of an insight what the gist of it is, and how did the love scenes come about?
Okay, the
It's
gist
got to be
of
more than just the brothers, I hope.
Yeah, yes it is. The gist of the trilogy is actually you got 3 brothers. You got Lucas, you got Jason, and you got Mac, and their father wants to see them married off, and so he plays behind the scenes matchmaker for all 3 of them, and each book focuses on each individual brother. And
Okay.
so in the first book we deal with Lucas, and he's a former NFL player, and his career is over due to an injury, and he's sort of like he's in, like, hidden away. He doesn't want to deal with life anymore because he's lost his identity. And Emma, who he ends up getting involved with, she's had a crush on him for years, and you know, Lucas's dad throws them together like a lot to try and make the sparks fly, because he notices that they both sort of have feelings for each other. And so Lucas fights it because he just doesn't feel like he can give anything anymore because he doesn't know who he is anymore. So
you really took on a role, I would think if there was a hardest role to take on, it would be that of a football player written by a female. That has to be because, no, seriously. I mean, you know, the boy next door is one thing.
right.
When you have a football player, you have somebody with attitude, you know, somebody with self-worth, and in this case, because of the injury, that self-worth is gone.
Exactly.
And yet you tackled that. How
I
do you
did.
feel about that?
I didn't think too much about it while I was writing it. It just I knew a lot of, not professional athletes, but I grew up with a lot of athletes, and I know that you know, that's a big part of a man's identity. And
Yes,
so,
definitely.
you know, I figured, you know, when you take that away, it does. They don't know who they are, and that was kind of interesting to explore that with his character. You know, to really sort of, he had to not only deal with his feelings for Emma, but he had to deal with who he was and who he was going to be, who he wanted to be from this point forward, since he couldn't be the man that he wanted to be.
It is funny, though, that both of you, and one of the reasons why I kind of targeted the two of you for this show was because you both chose to tackle a problem with a person of the opposite sex that's kind of a big issue. And I wonder, so I'll feel the same way, Samantha, that, you know, because he had that big life-changing moment, did it make it easier to write his character because of that?
Absolutely. I mean, that gives you plenty to work with. You know what I mean? Because really, something that traumatic, it does affect everything that he did and everything that he felt, and so to me, it made writing him easier. You know, it just gave me more material.
Right, yeah. That's what I kind of wondered. And would you suggest that for a new author as well, to kind of select some aspect of their personality even to focus on?
I do. I think that it gives the character a little bit more depth than it's just not, here's a guy and here's a girl and they're in love and happily ever after. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, not every relationship is just smooth. Everybody has issues, and sometimes, you know, we don't know what other people are going through, but everybody's got something a little bit deeper, and that just makes for an interesting story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I agree.
It seems like you tackled the biggest story in your first book. How do you top that in the second one? What was wrong with him?
Actually, that one was a lot lighter in the second one. His issue was just that he was an egomaniac, and because Lucas got married, now he felt like he had a target on his back, and so he did not trust anybody. He was convinced that every woman that he met wanted to marry him and was after him, and so he was just an arrogant idiot.
That would have been easy to write, right?
Yeah. Met a lot of arrogant idiots in my life, so really that one was easy.
The bigger question is, were you mad at your husband when you were writing that book?
I wasn't going to go there.
There were times, yes. You know, yet really, like, a character like that is easy to write because as a woman, as a wife, you know what it's like to get frustrated with somebody like that, and so it was easy to make the female character just banter back and forth with him because, you know, he was just that kind of a jerk. So.
Yeah, we have to put up a disclaimer again. It was not her husband.
That's right, not Frank.
How about you? Anything you want to add to that from your end? How you develop your characters?
They normally start out, you know, just fairly generic, and then once the plot starts going, then I develop their personalities a little bit more and give them a history. And that's something that I taught my students, that when you're creating characters, you got to create a history. They're not just born, really. This when you put their name on the page.
Right.
So even if you never use the history that you give them, it's something good to draw on.
Okay.
So, just to have that there, and just so that your character becomes more realistic to you as a writer. Rather than it just being a two-dimensional person. If you've created a whole lifetime bio of them, it just makes them feel a little bit more real to you, as a writer, and makes it easier for you to write about them.
Do you
and
sit
they don't
down
jump
and do
back
that?
and forth.
I'm sorry.
No, I say that they don't jump then back and forth in who they are,
Mm-hmm.
because they are somebody in your mind.
Yep, exactly.
And it has to go along that same line, deviating very little left and right.
Right.
Okay.
Do
Sorry.
you actually outline the characters, is what I was saying, before you start writing?
Absolutely.
You do. But I do. I think that you're both making interesting points, because everyone writes differently.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that it's very hard for people who are just getting started. It can become overwhelming. I mean, we've all been there as a beginner writer. It can become overwhelming trying to, in some cases, to build the story out, and in some cases to draw it in so that it's not, 1,000 pages or something. But you have to find your own techniques that work for you. But I think that you both agree essentially that in order to make a convincing character, you kind of have to know in your head what they are, who they are, before you start.
Absolutely.
And I think that that's certainly worth mentioning for people who are just getting started. You can't just start out blank, because you're going to get, well, like Rudy said, you're going to get inconsistencies if you do that.
Question in writing, and I realize we're supposed to be in the romance tonight, and maybe this is where it ties in a little bit. When you name your characters, is there something about what do you look at to name a character? Because to me, this is a strange thing, but a name means so much to me, because I guess throughout my life, if I saw somebody's name and then I met them, I almost had visualized what they looked like beforehand. A lot of times I was wrong. Sometimes I was right. But isn't that what people do? They see a name, and right away that name gives you some kind of an idea. So you have to come up with a perfect name for that. How do you do that? Samantha, in your case, how did you come up with Jake? Was he the football player?
No, Lucas was the football player.
Oh, Lucas. I'm sorry.
That's right.
Lucas was the yes. Okay.
Lucas was the football player, and I just love that name. I think that that's a really nice name, and sort of like what Dave was saying, when I hear a cool name, I have a list that I go to, and I find that I try to keep it a little bit simple with the names, because I've read a lot of great books that become distracting when people try to get too creative with names. Like they're trying to do something trendy, they're trying to do something new, and it just becomes distracting because some of the names are ridiculous. So I try to stay away from ridiculous. Hard to pronounce, exactly.
When you're struggling to pronounce the name every time you read it, it does become a distraction. Agreed.
And another thing, like my husband doesn't read what I write. Like he does not read romance novels at all. But in my book Ever After, a secondary character, his name was Mason, and I didn't think that it was that odd of a name. And every time he heard me say that name, he just cracked up. He's like, "Why do romance novels have to have such ridiculous names for the men?" He's like, I just don't get that. And I'm like, I don't even think that's a ridiculous name. Like I thought Mason was fairly normal, but I mean. You're not going to write a romance novel about a guy named Bob. It's just not, that's not going to go. So you want something a little trendy but not ridiculous. So I tend to go to like what the most popular baby names are for the year, and I'll go through that list and see if something grabs me.
That's a great idea.
You don't think you could write a romance using the name Bob or Harry?
There was a movie years ago. Roseanne Barr did a movie called She-Devil, and my husband and I laugh about it all the time because a romance novelist steals Roseanne Barr's husband in this movie, and her husband's name is Bob, and so her next novel that she writes, she names the hero Bob, and like her publicist and her editors are like, no, You cannot have a lead character. You cannot have the hero named Bob. And she's like, I think that's a beautiful name. And it's ridiculous. You just can't. That's just, I don't know. Sorry to all the Bobs out there, but you just,
Right.
it's just.
You're just not going to be the lead in a book anytime.
No.
Oh, well.
It's a secondary character. He could be the friend.
I'm glad my parents didn't name me Bob.
There you go.
So Samantha, what about you? When it comes to describing male clothing, are you precise or? Well, a lot of times they're shirtless, but you know.
You know, I tend to go fairly basic, and it's funny because most of the male characters in my book are they're executives, they're men who are out, like, you know, working in offices and CEOs. And I'm married to a man who's in construction, so like all I ever see is jeans and T-shirts and work boots.
And you don't write about them having jeans on?
I do, but normally, like, you know, that's not what they're primarily in. So I had to do a little bit of looking at GQ and seeing what the styles are and that. But I try to stay very, very basic. I don't focus too much on like designer names or things like that, or too specific. You know, if he's in a suit, he's in a suit, and I'll give the color. I don't go too much into detail on it.
Now, is that something you do intentionally, or is it just something that happens in your writing?
I kind of do it intentionally because I write. I don't know if you would notice, but like most of my books are like category length romances, so they're like under 60,000 words. Mm-hmm. So I don't do a whole lot of descriptive stuff. You know what I mean? Like it's mostly it's the characters, it's the dialogue, it's what's going on in the scene. So like a lot of descriptive stuff, I don't get too deep into. Mm-hmm. I like a more fast-paced story.
Now, Samantha, earlier we had asked Dave about dialogue in his books, and he said he uses very little of it. But I get a feeling by listening to what you've been saying, you use more dialogue.
I use a lot of dialogue.
We never did ask you. Now, how do you come up with the dialogue from a man's point of view? You know, other than you gave a kind of a hint, you know, that you were a tomboy when you were young. You know, but I don't buy that totally. So.
I will talk to anybody. I am a chatterbox. I can strike up a conversation anywhere with anybody, and I am a people watcher. You know, I mean, even if I'm at parties, I like watching how the people interact. I come from a very colorful family, and so dialogue is very important. You know, I mean, we're yappers, we're talkers. So I'm comfortable writing dialogue. I love like reading about people bantering back and forth because I think you learn a lot about the characters just in the way that they talk back and forth to one another.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
And I think that it makes it fun. It makes, because like I said, I enjoy a fast-paced story, and I think that sometimes you accomplish more with a couple of pages of dialogue than you would with 14 pages of just describing a room and the scene and what they're seeing and all that. I'd rather hear what the characters are thinking.
Okay.
Now, how do you approach the male speaking versus the female speaking differently at all, or?
Not really. Like I said, it just comes from all years of observation, and my husband and I, we've been together 25 years, and we could talk like till really one of us says, that's it, shut up, it's time to go to sleep, no more talking today, you know. So I just love conversing with people. I do, you know, and I think that gives you a lot of insight into people, the way that you talk with them.
I think that's true.